Alrighty, clown folk. We have had another session. This one, overall, I think is the rating that I would give it. Certainly, it was not the best session we had. I think there was part of me that kind of wanted to believe in the manifesting this to be a good session, and by just saying in previous videos that this was going to be the best session, trick my mind into then acting during the session to make it the best one. Turns out all that manifesting stuff is actually not real. Why didn't someone tell me that before? But it wasn't a disaster. It wasn't awful. It was just fine, I think. I still do believe session 2 probably the best session we've had so far. I think it just had the best engagement. I think it was the most fun. And part of me kind of chalks that up to some combination of it was getting late. It was 2 in the morning, and people were just getting that late night goofy energy. There was also some drink flowing that night, which is something we a little bit of in other sessions, but not really any other session reached the extent to which we were at session 2, which I don't necessarily think that those things made that session necessarily good. There's a million billion different little pieces of context and factors that could have affected that. But that is still the mark I want to hit with all these next sessions towards how much fun and how engaging they are. And I think, okay, so there's something that I always knew on not even just a subconscious level, but even on a conscious level. Something I never really went out of my way to act upon is, there's this idea of the DM is the MC, the master of ceremonies. They are both the warm-up comedian and the actual comedian themselves. They are there to set the energy level and then maintain that energy level for the entire event that is the session. That is just something that I just, on a personal level, am just not particularly good at, which is very much so a problem. Because honestly, I do think, at this point, when it comes to telling a story, I can do, I think, of the different things that are important for a DM, I think, knowing rules and being able to, gamify stuff, I think generally pretty much on, the lowest level of importance, still relevant and, needed to maintain a level of verisimilitude and immersion and all that, and consistency, basically. But generally not that important. Story stuff, I feel like I'm pretty decently good at this point, of being able to, on a session-by-session basis, have that A, B, C, beginning, middle, end, with a through line, have it connect to the campaign as a whole, take people's prompts and offers, and not even just incorporate those into the story, but turn those into their own whole stories themselves. But even then, I feel like that is still not as important as the table presence. I think that is still ultimately the number one thing that will determine whether or not your session is fun or not, is just if you come at it and can convince everyone else to have a high and uplifted energy, because it's just those vibe levels are very infectious, and if the person leading the activity can have a high energy, high confident vibe level, then everyone else will uplift themselves to match that. I think there's part of me that maybe didn't ever want to like admit that, or like at least on some level, because like in the grand scheme of things, that is like really easy to accomplish compared to like figuring out game mechanics and storytelling yada yadas. um it's just like easier than the game theory and storytelling theory and all of that. um yeah, for some reason I still don't I still haven't like been able to achieve like a high good table presence. And I guess like part of me thinks that it would just come across as like disingenuous and as though I was putting on a performance, as because like people would tell like, oh well, you're not normally like this, why are you trying to be weird and act all hyper and everything. um Even though when you're DMing, you are like literally putting on a performance. Like that is what you're doing. You are acting and telling a story. Like, so I like the other thing is that like my logical, rational mind has it understands that like, well, Joe, on the one hand, the game will just be more fun for yourself and for everyone involved if you do this, if you just start acting with a high like level of table presence. And and like the only way to do that is, the only way to get good at having that high level of table presence is by like doing it a lot, and the only way to do it a lot is just to do it at all. And like, my logical brain like understands all of that, but like for some reason whenever I've sat at the table, I have yet to be able to just like, I don't know, like just achieve that level of like table confidence and energy. uh I do think the thing that I'm going to try doing, one thing that I think has certainly not been helping me, is every session has sort of just been this like very sloppy transition of small talk at the table into like slowly going into the game and getting started. And there's this, it's always like awkward and choppy and clunky. um so I think in the future I'm just going to prepare some kind of intro to sort of just be a straight up like ritual to like just to set the tone, the mood, and to, like say like, okay guys, that's like, this is the end of like table talk. I'm now launching into my narration, and like this is the indication that the session is starting. Which I like, I guess I kind of did that for session one and then just like never did it for any of the other sessions. So I think I'm going to go back to doing that and sort of make it like a ritual for the future. Okay. So we can get into the session itself. So I did the thing where instead of giving everyone one-on-one individual scenes, I started breaking the group into pairs for them to each go on their own duo scenes. This, I realized I had made a blunder at the beginning of the campaign because I had conditioned everyone to do these one-on-one scenes and basically just to act with just me as the DM. Because now in these duo scenes with two players, both times what ended up happening is one player just like took the lead and did everything, and then there was a second player, and like, yeah, so there was one player that just did everything and just interacted with me as the DM, and we just had a back and forth. And then there was just another player whose character was supposedly present for the scene, but just ended up not doing anything, which is like very much so the exact opposite of what I wanted to have happen. Which I do get is my fault because I had basically just Pavloved them like 3 sessions in a row for multiple scenes every single time, just teaching them just to interact with me. So I think lesson learned for future campaigns, just off the rip, contrive and force reasons for the players to interact with each other, and not just like work together and be cooperative, but literally have to have a conversation with each other. Because I've figured out like that thing that is like really that meat, that juice of D&D, that interaction between the players and like between the characters in the story is just totally not present. And I can very much so like the game just feels like extremely like flat because of this. And I could tell that it was definitely my fault from how I started this campaign. Which a little bit of a whoopsie daisies. So specifically, what am I talking about here? Okay, so first thing, Jackson and Scarlett were decided to get married. This was basically my reason for Shred, Jackson's son, and then Steam, Scarlett's friend, to interact. So Scarlett is like basically using Jackson for his money that he's about to get, as he's going to become a BBS executive once more. Scarlett basically offered to make him a vampire, so it's not like an entirely, this isn't like a full gold digger situation. It's like gold digger, but if the gold digger could literally turn you into a vampire, which is that's like a pretty even trade, I think, all things considered. So I guess I had initially in my mind palace, in my railroaded ideal sort of version of events, this was going to lead to a conversation between Steam and Shred, where Steam is asking Shred like, so well, like, what's the deal with your father? And then we can get some more character out of both Steam and his relation with his dad. And then Shred asking Steam about Scarlett and getting more information about her and their relation, and then what they actually think of this marriage becoming a thing. But this ended up just becoming a conversation between Shred and Jackson about how, he's getting fleeced. Basically, the scene itself went through, they got married, and then they left, and a priest attacked Scarlett on the street, threw holy water at her, and then multiple botches by Steam resulted in some kid getting killed, and then now speeding away from the scene of the crime. Scarlett falls off the front of the motorcycle and gets her head run over, and she is just dead, which I'm totally fine with how that scene resolved. I think that's very interesting, and I think there's potential of more developments and stuff to occur from how this scene actually ended up playing out, or from like the results of that like came from the conclusion of this scene. But the actual playing through of the scene itself, I was not very happy with how I handled it. Okay, and then we had Boyd and a new character, Dreadbeard. Dreadbeard, union leader that they had interacted with last session, the replacement of Ed. So there was this idea of trying to get Tim the Matchstick Boyd a new job. Originally, ideally, a legit job. So this scene starts off with Boyd getting a call from Vaughn telling him that Tim was smoking Sherm on his shift, and he can't work there any longer. So now they are tasked with getting Tim a new job. So I guess I was hoping that this would kind of be an introduction for Dreadbeard, and like Boyd would come to him to get him like a kind of like legit union job. Um, again, in my mind palace railroaded ideal version of events, that is not what ended up happening. And again, once I as the DM, I like it's I just set the scene, and then once the scene is set, it's up to the players to do with it whatever they want. um, and where this ended up going is Dreadbeard instead saying like, well, he does drugs, I want nothing to do with him. Which, fair enough, that's like part of his character. I guess in my ideal version of events, this would have gone in a more of a back and forth kind of direction where like Dreadbeard maybe goes in more of a like, well, he's a young kid, we gotta get him off drugs and we gotta like help him out to become a proper working citizen. um but that didn't end up happening. He just like shut down any interaction between them, and Boyd had instead decided to send him to like Trip his like street kind of burglar friend, like small scale criminal guy. So again, interesting result of this scene, because now we have determined that okay, Tim is going to be getting into the criminal enterprise to some extent. So I do think that's an interesting direction for his character to start going into. But again, I wish I had done some stuff differently as the NPCs to push for more of a to not sort of like suggest that characters should just like, I don't know, like give up in their position just so like immediately. I wish I like had pushed people further to maybe think about things and like to consider alternative options and to maybe consider new lines of thinking. I don't know. Again, there's a very delicate balance between wanting to give the players freedom to handle things however they want, and to not just like push them in the exact direction that I want things to go in. But on the other hand, sometimes letting players just do what they want doesn't result in the most like story forward interesting way that things could go, if that like makes any sense, I guess. So anyway, as for the session itself, or as for the job itself, for the mission, we are the robot hacker group had that they had said that they wanted to work with, at least to some false sense, or like to maybe some like double agent yada yada stuff going on. They decided to do a job for them, to specifically we are asked them to go to this military base to acquire this information that would allow them to like get past the security of the processing plant that Abraxas the god is currently being held at. Okay, to this end, they are basically asked to escort H209, their a hacker, into this facility where his sort of brother AI, H109, is currently being kept, so that H209 can like download the information that H109 has regarding all this security stuff. So So a little bit of like a lore dump to explain what's going on here. Which during the session itself, I wanted to avoid having any kind of like lore dump because those are unfun to like listen to someone just prattle on about stuff for a while. So I tried dispensing this into little bits and pieces, but this is all very relevantly tied into the infosynth war that had occurred some number of years in the past. Effectively, like AIs created by corporations had eventually reached this point of singularity where they were now like progressing faster and faster, like exponentially, just improving uh, faster than any mortal scientific and or magic means that non-AI could achieve. And so like these AI started like creating copies of themselves from these like corporation AIs, and in fact they've reached this conclusion that they need to like upload everyone's consciousness to the metaplane and uplift everyone to the next level of reality, and then they can finally create a perfect light being communist utopia. Corporations were very much so not down with this idea. They did not want to exist in this new reality where AI were in control of everyone and everything. So a war begins. The sort of like commune bots made this mistake of assuming that generally people would act like logically and rationally and believe that it's in their best interest to like accept this utopia and to live in this into the metaplane, but instead like the corpos just like put out tons of like propaganda and all that jazz and like had convinced everyone that like this would be a disaster and a robot dictatorship, which who knows, maybe it would have actually ended up being that case. Never ended up happening, so who's really to say. But basically, war begins, war breaks out, and the corporations just like shut down and like release viruses and stuff and end up destroying the vast majority of these communist robots. And so H209 and H109 are two copies of these robots that had been like on opposite sides of this war. H109, the original, the like corporation that has since been like abandoned and has just gone like crazy, and it's just like been stuck in this like derelict military abandoned base after the war. Then H209 is like one of the few like remaining uplifted communist bots that is now working for We Are. Both of these AIs are now in like robot shells, like like android metal robot bodies. Okay, so yeah, so that was the job, was to getting the information of H109 that had at one point been a robot created by BBS Biotech that had access to their like security protocol information. So the job itself. Okay, so they start off. They go to mess hall, cafeteria, find some robots, kill them, some security bots. And then they walk into some more rooms. There's an interrogation chamber. This had a vampire that has gone into torpor in one of the isolation cubes, the ISO cubes. This was going to be this was going to be the sire of Scarlet, which I figure there might have been some interaction there. Basically his deal was gonna be that like as long as the players like keep like feeding him blood and like draining and like weakening themselves, that he would be able to like run around and help them with stuff. But they just ended up splattering his brains all over the wall while he's in torpor instead. Okay. the training room, the holographic rooms. So generally this session was going to be like all robot, all cybernetic stuff, and this was sort of going to be the Steam session where he got to do all his hacking stuff. But a lot of these rooms ended up getting solved by EMP grenades used by Dreadbeard, which Dreadbeard was a little bit of an experiment of what happens when I try to push the boundaries of the system and just like make a like a munchkin just like character that is like very OP at one specific thing. This character was going to be very, very good at like just killing stuff. And so I realized a sort of fundamental flaw in the system itself, I think. And that, well, or maybe it's honestly not even okay. Well, basically, the idea is that like harder and harder encounters, like straight up combat stuff, was going to have armor values associated with it, which would literally have just like the harder an encounter is, the more it would just subtract from the hits that you had achieved. And I kind of like forgotten about this idea of armor throughout this entire campaign, both from the player side and from the enemy side. And so I realized that like if I used armor, that some players basically just would be incapable of interacting with combat encounters on a straight up combat, like in a combat sense. Like you like if you know, so like for example, they eventually fight some minotaurs, probably have been like a quality 3 armor rating 3 combat that would just subtract any successes against them by 3, which I think would have made like Dreadbeard a reasonable, effective like combat encounter. Like it would have been like more like consistent to how strong they should have been. And then but on the other hand, it would have basically prevented everyone else from interacting with them at all by like shooting at them, because they just very unlikely that they ever get like more than 3 successes. Which I guess my hope is that that would kind of force people, since like they are just going to be incapable of getting the number of successes to deal with them through a firefight check, they would have to try to deal with this through some clever creative means. For example, maybe the hacker would have to use their like biofeedback hacking attack to like tap into the enemy cybernetics and stuff and deal with combat encounters through that. But I kind of got the sense that people weren't really, I don't know, maybe I just, like, it seems like it wouldn't have been fun for people to discover this by having to fail a bunch of checks in order to figure out how, like, just shooting stuff wouldn't be a reasonable response to these kinds of combat encounters, and or feeling like it would feel kind of cheap to suddenly remember how combat at all is supposed to work and to sort of just throw on the fact that like, oh hey, yeah guys, actually harder encounters just have like, will just subtract from your successes. Which on the one hand, the game like certainly suffers if you don't actually incorporate that kind of stuff. So I think maybe beginning of the next session I will just like bring it up as a question of like, well guys, should we be playing the game how I had kind of like originally intended for encounters to work, and actually make like combat's very difficult and threatening, or do you guys just want to keep running it as we've been running it and like kind of maybe turn you guys a little bit more into like superheroes than I had originally intended. So So yeah, I think I will like leave that up to the players to determine whether or not they've been having more fun by just slaughtering enemies without any recourse, or if they want combat to be extremely like deadly, which is how I originally kind of envisioned it. Um, but anyway, where did I leave off? So yeah, it's okay. So the training room, there was a bunch of security bots in there, but they were like mostly all holograms. So there's going to be that sort of like Pikachu double team displacer beast mirror image thing going on. Um, okay. Then the drone control room. So this, there was going to be a thing where they could maybe like activate the drones to like take control of them, to like bring them in through the rest of the mission, do stuff with them. But they EMP'd this room, basically shut that down, which very reasonable. Armory, there was a little bit of a landmine bio recognition thing, trap, weight, pressure plate, yada yada. Then they got to the generator room, so there was like a magicite powered reactor, which is basically just magical uranium that does weird magic stuff. There were some myconids, a myconid colony that was feeding off of the power of it, but the myconids were also responsible. Their like network was what was taking the power radiating off of this thing and like connecting it to the rest of the facility through its like overgrown mycelial network. So there was going to be a question of like, well, do you guys want to try to make peace with these myconids? Basically, the question was going to be like, well, you can make peace with them. They will like help you out, and they will like, become some like allies for you guys hanging out at this base. But you're going to have to like give them this whole base. Like you're just gonna have to promise to let them like expand throughout everything. Which may be a little bit of like a other question of like, well, what if they start expanding past the base and start like infecting all of Lostum? But that ended up not really like well, basically they just threw a firebomb in there and killed all the myconids, and that shut off power to the whole facility. So they get inside and they interact with H109, the original. They get inside. Now the power is shut off. The electromagnetic hydraulic lock system has been deactivated. They're able to get inside to the nuclear bunker, and they find H109 there, who's just like this like crazy robot. Basically, oh yeah, so something else. So this session, I feel like I remembered most of the things I actually wanted to have happen. I was going to have like loudspeakers throughout the whole base, and like H109 was going to be like heckling them throughout the whole thing. Kind of like a Batman Riddler situation. But I like that. That's the one thing that I kind of like forgot about this session. Until they actually got to him, I was like, oh well, it's kind of too late for that now. So they get to him, and interestingly enough, they decide to actually side with him and betray the We Are robot, the hacker that they were with, and they shut him down, and they take H109's like memory chip and then install it into the H209, so that they can now have this crazy robot mole on their side infiltrate We Are. So that I think was like a creative response that I wasn't necessarily expecting. Which, I'm certainly curious to see where that ends up going in the future. So they do that. They backstab 209, install 109 in his memory, and then they leave the facility. So this I was going to do originally the kind of like climax of this session was going to be them like shutting down H109 and like stealing his memory chip. And then that was going to be like a dead man switch, which was going to like activate like a trap. And then there was going to be like bombs and explosions and gas being released into the facility. And then there was going to be like an escape clock where they would have to like run away and like go through all the rooms that they had come through. But you know, like do whatever to escape the facility before the entire thing blows up. But yeah, I guess that ends up not happening because they decide to side with H209, which again, that's fine. I think that was like an interesting. I was pretty happy with the sort of like creative problem solving in that sense. I definitely am surprised that they decided to side with the crazy robot because I figured at least some of the party did seem like they actually did want to side with We Are originally, and that it was only a little bit of the party that actually wanted to side with BBS Biotech. But it seems like they've all pretty much just switched to screw We Are. We are on we're on BBS Biotech side now, baby. Which you know what? At least they're all on the same page now. So I guess that's good for party cohesion. It seems like there's not really a. It seems like they're not really gonna go with the cloak and dagger who's backstabbing who anymore. So they leave. They run into Gridulzar, a mind flayer of the Hundanites, who basically offers like, hey, right, so they had to bring the flesh deck, the Jackson's cousin, who's been stuck into this computer from the BBS Biotech exec contract, all that stuff. And this was going to be like a sort of like compression algorithm that they had been working on from BBS Biotech that was going to actually allow them to transfer all the security information from 109 to 209. And that was like the thing that they had been working on, that we had been doing with this flesh deck. And so Gridulzar, the Mind Flayer, basically offers like, hey, take all that information from your robot friend, put it into this flesh deck, and then let me suck its brain, because I'm a Mind Flayer and I can get information by eating people's brains. Let me do that, and then I will use, the power of the forgotten gods and, these ancient eldritch horrors that I worship, and we can corrupt and control the Abraxas, and we can bend it to our whims and will, and then we will just have total utter domination control over this god, and we can do with it whatever we want. Which this probably would have been like the utmost superest like evil route that they could have possibly gone. I just wanted to throw that out there, possibly as an option if they wanted to do that. But again, Hundanites, trusting literal like Cthulhu monsters, they're probably the most likely to betray you and for things to not go the way you wanted to out of any of the options available. So I'm not very surprised that they decided to not go with this. I am pretty happy with the creative solution that they had come up with this, though, which was to say, sure, we'll do this. And then install inject a virus into the flesh deck and a corrupted version of the security information, and then they gave it to the Mind Flayer. Mind Flayer ate the brain of the cousin flesh deck, and then was affected by the virus, and he just started stroking out and just like started having a seizure. So the players killed him. The Minotaurs, the Mind Flayer brought Minotaur bodyguards as the Hundanites who attacked the players. And again, this would have been the point where if I actually had used the armor and had used the armor rating and like the encounter level rules that I'd initially put into the game, this would have been an extremely tough fight. Instead, Dreadbeard just absolutely pops off and just instantly kills both of them. um, which, fair enough. And then that pretty much brings us to the end of the session. The We Are pays them some money, and the players decide, like, cool, so next session we are going to infiltrate We Are for, like, BBS Biotech, which I think that'll make for a very interesting session. I'm certainly excited to see how that goes. And I think that'll definitely be fun. So I think now I think more so than any other session in the past, they have, like, not only are they just doing a job because, well, that kind of seems like the thing that we're being led to do, and or, well, I feel like this is just a kind of reward that we want to go for, and this is like the kind of like thing that we want to expand on our crew sheet. Now it seems like they're actively like making a decision based on what direction they want the next session to go in, based directly on what's happening in the story itself, and like on the greater plot, the greater central tension. They're like, we want to go in this direction to pursue this path towards the narrative as a whole. So generally, I think the last 15-20 minutes of this session was actually pretty good. We finally started getting some creative solutions that I was happy with. We finally started getting some like interesting, like, story relevant decisions being like made by the players. But yeah, the beginning of this session definitely very slow and quite sloppy. And like throughout the mission itself, the interaction between that I had kind of prepared between the players and the NPCs, either, well, for one, with the whole loudspeaker, I just completely forgot about, which that would have been some interaction between H109 and 209. That was definitely on me. And then the other two NPC interactions that they could have potentially had, they just slaughtered their way through, which, fair enough. That's, like, that is the player's call ultimately. So I think overall my take on the session, I do think ultimately this kind of felt like every time I kind of had two choices to make as a DM, I ended up making like the bad, uninteresting choice. It felt like by the end of the session I had flipped like 20 coins and had like landed on tails every single time. Except that's not even a good analogy, because this wasn't random. This was just me actively making choices, and I felt like I just kept making bad and wrong choices. Overall, where I think we are in the campaign, I think we are dancing on there were a few moments where we were dancing on the precipice of a true troll rape debacle this session. Not in the sense that any players had decided that this was a good time to go into detail about describing how they would violate each and every hole of a non-consenting troll. Fortunately, yeah, we didn't get any multiple minute long graphic descriptions of that, but in a metaphorical sense of I think, yeah, we were metaphorically dancing on the precipice of troll rape, as troll rape being a time when, like, a moment, a threshold that is breached, where I can, like, viscerally feel that the players are like bored and like are done with the campaign and are just like, all right, like this, like we're ready to wrap things up. um, because the thing that had garnered the most emotional reaction, the thing that had gained, that had the most amount of a response to it throughout this entire session, is when a player had decided to pee with the door open. And when that's the thing during the course of a session in a game that you let command the room, when that becomes the thing that the players care about the most with what is actively happening, certainly it is a marker for being on the downwards trajectory of engagement into the campaign as a whole. Which, like, if this were the last campaign, this is when I would have my head in my hands and be crying of woe is me, this is the death of everything that I had like put in effort to try to harbor and create and like foster. But instead, new campaign, new me, I've decided to instead take this and meet this with the energy of that Japanese fisherman viral YouTube video who puts his fist in the sky and says, never give up. So I'm not going to let this be a marker of, just kill all energy and effort and everything I've put into this campaign. I'm going to take this as I have just got to radically change the energy that I'm coming to these sessions with, and I've really have got to try to change things to make sure that we don't devolve further into that direction of the most interesting and the most emotionally responsive thing to have happen is like how people decide to go to the bathroom. So yeah, generally is my response to how this session went. But yeah, I'm gonna use this as a wake-up call to really try to end with on a strong note. Because I do. That's the other thing, is that the last campaign, I feel like we were maybe like, I don't even know how much. We probably had at least a double-digit number of sessions left by the time I could tell people were bored and done with that campaign. But now I feel like, all right, I just got a couple of sessions left. Like I just gotta bring it home and end on a high note. And I don't think I think I've still got the will and the power and the energy and the motivation towards this campaign to wrap everything else up and to end on a high note. All right, yep, that's everything I had. Just spirit. I'm gonna power through, and spirits, despite everything that's happened, spirits are high. All right, I'll see you guys later.